Good old Sailor Moon. This brings so much nostalgia. I still remember as a little girl, straight after school, sailing in front of TV, extremely excited to watch a new episode of this show. Any kid of the 1990s will easily recognize the classic and iconic anime and manga created by Naoko Takeuchi. Well, I don't think this needs much introduction, but just in case you don't know, or to summarize a little bit, this series is often recognized with popularizing the subgender called magical girl, or also Majou Shoujo in Japanese. Majou Shoujo is a gender within the anime and manga who focuses on young girls who have magical powers, who are able to transform into a cute superheroine who battles against monsters and her villains. Miss Takeuchi, or as they say, Takeuchi sensei, took inspiration from multiple sources, which is what I'm going to discuss today. Sailor Moon universe is quite big, so for the sake of not making this video too long, well, anyway, I think it's gonna be long, this one, I decided to make a part 2 of this video, and well, who knows, maybe I end up doing a series, but for now it's gonna be only 2 parts of a series. This one is going to be focused more from an aesthetic point of view, and the second one is going to be more about the symbolism and the inspiration behind the world building creation. Okay, so maybe it's unknown for a lot of people, but Sailor Moon is an immersion into fashion and art, and not any typical fashion. Miss Takeuchi loves couture fashion, which explains why a lot of her characters are wearing attires from the fashion runways and editorials from the 1990s. Pulling directly designers from Chanel, Dior, Thierry Mugler, which I'm actually wearing a jacket myself for the occasion. All these references can be found across the manga, art books, and anime adaptations. The information discussed in this video, it's going to be based on the manga and remake, not the 90s version. Why? The reason it's because I believe that the visual of the new remake are a little bit more closer to the wispy and sort of like elegant art style of Naoko Takeuchi compared to the less refined, a little bit more childish 90s version. In the remake, I can see a much clearer inspiration behind the manga's original designs, the details in the garments as well, the color palette, which is a little bit more pastel. But since the remake is still not finished, I'm going to be using a mix of clips of the 90s version and the new remake. Just wanted to clarify that in case that you get confused of the mix of animations. So as far as sources go, I like to use information that is reliable, that it's official, since this is kind of like educational. But unfortunately, I couldn't find much. All the information that you're going to see is based on information shared by the author, interviews made to her, a few articles, and my own research and opinion. Anyway, you have all the links in the description box, and that will be all. Let's dive in. Okay, let's start with the iconic Princess Serenity dress. Well, I would say more heavily, since the similarities are striking. I'm talking from the Palladio dress from the Dior Couture collection of 1992, designed by Gianfranco Ferré, an Italian designer who was the creative director of Dior between 1989 and 1997. The gold embroidery in the bust imitates the traditional iconic column from Greek and Roman architecture. The sleeves reminds of the skulls of a column, and the long pleated silk georgette skirt has this flute column shape. I really like Gianfranco Ferré. People tend to talk mostly about John Galliano, which I get it, and I love John Galliano. He is one of the most iconic creative designers in Dior, but I don't think Gianfranco Ferré as a designer, is rich enough. Also, fun fact, background of Gianfranco Ferré was in architecture, which obviously shown in his designs, but also it influenced him to emphasize the importance of a well-constructed garment, which sadly is something that you rarely see in fashion nowadays, in my opinion. Anyway, a difference with Serenity dress is that the skirt has some sort of like more ball gown shape. The seams have this sort of like ruffle shape as well. You know, it doesn't have that straight and stiff shape from the original one. I also wanted to add another design that Naoko Takeuchi might have taken some inspiration from. Princess Serenity later on in the series becomes a queen, and her dress suffers some slight alterations, very minimal, especially on the back area. And the dresses she took inspire from is Angelo Doro from an also Italian designer called Roberto Capucci, designed in 1987. The dress is a strapless imperial line evening gown. The body is composed of fluid pleated panels of gold, cream, and rose gold taffeta, trimmed to the back with a full-length weight simulating angel wings. Well, this is a theory, but it could be because I think the aesthetic of both designers is a little bit similar. It's very sumptuous, very lavish, and I think the combination of both dresses work really, really nicely. It's also nice for a change to choose this type of dress for a princess instead of the typical gown and Disney type of dress. Anyway, let's go with Sailor Moon and the gang. The girls dress in they tend to wear in a much more sophisticated way in the manga, whereas in the 90s version, they dress in a much more casual and sporty fashion, a little bit more childish, I would say. But maybe it makes more sense since this is targeted for young audiences, and maybe they made that change to make it more appealing. But going back to the fashion theme, there's quite a bit of Chanel by Karl Lagerfeld. In one of the art books, there's an illustration of Setsuna, Sailor Pluto, who's wearing a Chanel couture dress from the 1992 collection, worn by Christy Turlington, and later on by Naomi Campbell in a fashion editorial. We also have Penélope Cruz in Los Abrazos Rotos by Almodóvar. I'm not a huge fan of Penélope Cruz, but she looks stunning in this movie, and I love that scene that she is, putting on the necklace. She looks really, really pretty in that one. And also Lily Rose Depp wore it last year in a red carpet. Sailor Venus, on the other hand, is wearing another Chanel outfit from the 1995 collection. Part of the obvious couture Chanel attires that I just named, there's some fashion and cultural references from Japan. In the late 1980s and beginning of the 90s, in Tokyo, there was a fashion trend called Shibuya Casual, which was popular among college and high school students from upper class areas. His style was refined and quite preppy, with a focus more on mixing American and French luxury brands such as Ralph Lauren, Levi's, Chanel, and Louis Vuitton. So we have Rei, Sailor Mars, who among the girls gang, I would say she's the one with a much more mature and refined look. Just a quick mention, she is a Miko, which in English means shrine priestess, which this group of people tend to enjoy an upper class position, and they tend to come from priest families. Her father is supposed to be a famous politician, and she goes to an all-girls private school. She seems to come from wealth, and those traits might explain why her outfits seem to be very Chanel-inspired, very classic out of her uniform, her school uniform and sailor. Then we have Sailor Uranus and Neptune, who seem to be following that Shibuya's casual trend as well. Naoko Takeuchi has stated that she also got inspiration from Japanese fashion magazines such as BB, Can-Can, Gigi, fashion magazines that were targeted for young women. The theme in them was quite sophisticated, very, I would say, Shibuya's casual, because there was a lot of displaying of luxury items, something that defines the Shibuya casual very well. But the style was a little bit more fun, more bright, and very cutesy. A style that maybe will define much more Usagi, the protagonist, or Makoto and Minako, Sailor Venus and Jupiter. Then we have Ami, the, I would say, conservative one. I mean, not trying to be mean, but she is supposed to be the brain. She's also the most quiet one of the group. She doesn't seem to be a fashionista, which that's okay. I like that each of them have a very defined and different personality. Keeping on with the Chanel theme, there's some other minor roles rocking some Chanel outfits with logo included, I would have to say. I also found a photo of Naoko Takeuchi, very low quality though, but she seems to be wearing a Chanel set herself. Some Versace as well. Maybe a little bit of Jean Paul Gaultier, perhaps. Some of them are more obvious than others. We do have Chibiusa and Sailor Saturn, but they don't seem to have a very distinct style. Chibiusa is always wearing her school uniform, a dress that she has that has a lot of sailor theme on it, her sailor uniform as well. Sailor Saturn the same, her school uniform and a lot of black, very simple dresses. In the art book, so you can see, a few outfits, a much more defined style. Chibiusa per se, she tends to have very colorful, very vibrant, cute outfits. Something that I could see Usagi wearing if she still was a girl. Naoko Takeuchi tends to draw them together, matching outfits as mother and daughter. That's quite cute. I will discuss later on an outfit of each of them as their villain alter ego. If you have seen the story, you will understand. I also wanted to quick mention regarding the sailor uniforms inspiration. Behind the inspiration seems to be the outfits that figure skating wear. And it's not strange because Naoko Takeuchi has stated many times that she's a huge fan of ice skating. This is very apparent in the way the skirts flow. Miss Takeuchi usually draws them flowing in the wind, same look as an ice skater. But not only her sailor uniforms, their sort of like choreographies when they transform or their cast of magic spells remind me of this as well. Okay, here comes my favorite part, the costumes of villains. I love me a good villain. Especially they're inspired by the amazing Thierry Mugler, one of my absolutely favorite designers. The French designer was a hit through the 80s and 90s. His designs were visionary, fantastical, futuristic, and had an erotic aesthetic. He was the first to produce astonishingly theatrical runway shows. Let's go with the tutu skirt worn over a semi-sheer catsuit from his 1992 collection. Inspiration behind the costume of the character, villain, Koanu. I'm just gonna keep with the Japanese pronunciation because some of those names are quite difficult to pronounce. But anyway, not only she took the outfit as an inspiration, but her hairdo too. You will see that Naoko Takeuchi loves to copy poses from fashion editorials and even cover movies. There's also her sister Berutieru, whose bodysuit I would say is influenced by the light blue with shimmery murmur gown with matching gloves of the same collection. Queen Beryl, whose dress seems to be very similar to Berutieru one's, especially the bust area, but I would say hers is more similar to the one that Ivana Trump wore as well in the same collection. She looks really pretty, I gotta say. Following, we have another Akayashi sister, Calavera, but whose costume instead is designed by a designer named Christian Lacroix from his collection of 1992. He has a very theatrical aesthetic. He's an amazing designer, and I think the combination of Thierry Mugler and Christian Lacroix works really, really good. I want to emphasize Thierry Mugler's career as a fashion designer. In one article says that his work was described to be about embracing the superhero mystique, really important as his work is about fantasy and assuming different identities. It's like a warrior putting on a battlesuit. It does sound really similar to Sailor Moon, right? Sailor Moon has this superhero and fairy tale theme all over. Fairy tales have been aligned with the high fashion world multiple times. There's endless similarities between the two subjects. There's fantasy, there is beauty, there's history, there's myths, etc. The term fairy tale is often used to describe clothing that is especially lavish, beautiful, and seemingly unattainable. Gowns which one would rarely wear in the real world. The world of fashion is very often a fantasy, not a reality. A fairy story told in hopes of inspiring people to somehow elevate its state of existence. Through such wonderful outfits, Naoko Takeuchi provided the empowered message that women can be a badass crime fighter and look fabulous while doing it. I feel like both Mugler and Takeuchi share the same message as far as giving women a way to express their style and freedom. Supposedly the most powerful, Sailor Galaxia, she's seen wearing a golden bodice armor, not straight too far from Mugler's famous gold medal corset, seen in 1995. Later on, Celine Dion wears it for a shooting of her last album, and I think Beyonce also wore it for one of her tours. Let's go with the following designer, who was also an inspiration behind some of the villain costumes. Let's start with Black Lady, who is the villain alter ego of Chibiusa. Black Lady's outfit was inspired by a dress of the Opium perfume of 1994, worn by Kate Moss. Then we have Mistress 9, who's also a villain alter ego. That dress, I found it because I'm on a fashion group in Facebook and someone posted a photo of it. I was like, this looks so similar to Mistress 9 dress, especially the body's shape. The colors are completely different, but it could be inspired by it. I would also like to give you some Yves Saint Laurent background, just so you understand a little bit the inspiration behind the costumes of certain villains that I'm going to talk about later. Yves Saint Laurent was born in Oran, Algeria. His birth country was a huge inspiration to him, and later on, Morocco, specifically Marrakesh, where he had a house and spent a lot of his time. There's also a museum of him, which I hadn't had the opportunity to visit. I would love to. Well, I haven't visited Marrakesh, to be honest. I would love to visit Marrakesh and his museum, definitely. Anyway, in his designs, there's elements of traditional North African costumes and mixed with some classical forms. This is very obvious in one of his most celebrated collections of 1967 called African Costumes. You can find Maraha tunics, whimsical turbans, babushka skirt hats. An homage, it's like an homage to cultures like Morocco, Spain, Russia, China, Africa, etc. Such international references allowed Yves Saint Laurent to step away from the sort of like elegant and conservative that was going on in the fashion industry at that time, pushing further the boundaries of couture fashion and bringing modernity. He translated his visual experiences in North Africa into garments with unexpected combinations of colors with the time being. This made him the colorist of his generation. Having said that, I think Yves Saint Laurent is the inspiration behind the costumes of the Amazon Quartet. They're actually one of my favorite villains. I love their dynamics and I find their outfits so cute. You know, a mix of African and Oriental, which is a huge theme in most of Yves Saint Laurent collections. In 1991 of the Spring-Summer collection, there were some outfits highly inspired by the African culture. Some of them remind me so much of the Amazon Quartet. In 1993, there's a little bit of more Asian flavor to it, and I don't know, I can really see it. It's less obvious. It's not, as I said, as you have seen in other examples, where the inspiration it's quite up. I would also like to touch a costume that I really like. She has a very minor role, I would say. She appears almost at the end of the show. I'm talking about Princess Kakyuu. Though her costume is not related to couture fashion, I would say it's more of historical fashion. At first I thought Princess Kakyuu costume wasn't an inspiration of one thing, but a combination of historical fashion from Eastern cultures. With a little bit of twist though, because her poofy pants reminds me a lot of the ones that they used to wear during the Renaissance era, 15th and 16th century. Also her sleeves have this sort of like puffiness to it as well. Her outfit as a sailor looks completely different from the other girls. This one looks sort of like a fairy costume from a folklore story, which I gotta say blends really well with the Renaissance characteristics I just mentioned. You know, think about something like A Midsummer Night Dreams by William Shakespeare, which was written during the Renaissance era. But I'm just mumbling. Maybe it might be a theory. I'm not 100% sure, but who knows? Maybe Naoko Takeuchi got inspired by the Renaissance era. Who knows? Having said that, I think Princess Kakyuu design is highly inspired by traditional Chinese fashion and mythology. I had my first suspicions because of the flower osmanthus, a species native in Asia that grows in Himalaya, China, India, Japan, I believe, and many more countries. It's literally a theme all over her costume. She has it on her head, on her hairdo, on her forehead. She has that incense burner with the smell of the flower as well. The planet that she's supposed to come from is called Kinmokuze, which is the Japanese name of that flower. Then I discovered a Chinese myth that I'm not going to cover here in detail. It's going to be included in the part 2 of this video. All I'm going to say for now is that this Chinese myth includes the flower that I just discussed and the moon, a crucial thing in the Sailor Moon universe, which this tells me that this was intentional. Anyway, let's discuss a little bit more her costume. So the upturned two-cap shoes are the most typical ancient China shoes. Though this sort of like upturned shape it's a common feature in other ancient cultures. I actually thought at the beginning that the shoes might be influenced by the Indian culture. They do have this sort of like shape. These shoes are also studied specifically in the Qing dynasty, and later on they become highly valuable. Then we have the marking on the forehead, which is a traditional Chinese beauty ornament called Huadiang. I don't know if I'm pronouncing correctly, I'm really sorry. They're purely ornamental accessories that become fashionable among women during the Tang dynasty. The color of red, bright yellow, I believe, and purple belong to the emperor and the imperial family. So, that may be an explanation why she's wearing red, since she's a princess. I was also looking for hats similar to the pointy one that she seems to wear, but I couldn't find any. But I found a crown which name is Lotus. It's made of gold and jade and is also decorated with jewels. It was highly popular in the Tang dynasty. I researched all the ancient China dynasties, but I couldn't find any dress that resembles Princess Kakyuu dress. Though her sleeves resembles a little bit of the sleeves that ladies used to wear on the Han dynasty, but apart of that, I couldn't find anything remotely similar. But anyway, she has a lot of Chinese elements of her costume, so we can agree that it was highly, highly, highly influenced by the ancient China culture. I realized that I haven't touched much, well, not much, literally nothing of the men's fashion, but literally 95% of the characters in the show are female, so there's not much men's fashion to analyze. And plus, I don't really like men's fashion. Sorry, not sorry. But at least I'm gonna analyze Mamoru, the romantic interest of the protagonist, known as Tuxedo Mask, and Prince Endymion. Naoko Takeuchi has said that she took inspiration for the Tuxedo Mask costume from anime characters such as the iconic Captain Harlock, Armor Trooper Bottoms, and then we have Lupin the Third, real iconic animes and shows. There seems to be a pattern here: the handsome hero who goes into battles, adventure, who has a romantic interest and all that jazz. But in this case, I would say it's purely aesthetic. He's not really here in the story of Sailor Moon. I also want to mention that Lupin the Third was highly, highly, highly inspired by the character named Arsène Lupin, created by the French author Maurice Leblanc. This gives us another hint of the inspiration behind Tuxedo Mask. Think about like the mysterious thief who steals various gems, like silver crystal. His past life, Mamoru was Prince Endymion. His attire reminds me of the typical knight, such as King Arthur. Oh, now that I remember, there's also the boys, Prince Endymion gang. I think they're known for Four Kings, which I don't understand why they named it like this, since Prince Endymion is supposed to be superior to them. they were literally his soldiers, but well, whatever. His costumes seem to be uniforms. There's a lot of military theme on them, but I would say there's a mix of classical uniforms worn during the Imperial Russia or Germany as well, with a futuristic touch to it, which I just said, you know, Sailor Moon, it's a mix of classical and futuristic inspirations. Also, I don't know if it's coincidence or not, but now that I remember, when I was checking all the Thierry Mugler collections that I was able to find on the internet or books, because I gotta say the archive of his first collection, specifically during the 80s, it's not very extensive, so it was sort of like tricky. But anyway, I think Naoko Takeuchi inspiration comes within the 90s. But there's a collection of 1986, I believe, which the theme was this sort of like Soviet / science fiction extravaganza. And there's some uniforms that look very, very similar to the Four Kings uniforms. So maybe Thierry Mugler, again, was the inspiration behind the costumes of those characters. But anyway, maybe I could do a future video more in depth about the men costume in the series. I think at the beginning of next year they're gonna release the movies of the continuation of the remake, and there's going to be more male characters, specifically Helios, which I'm really excited because when I was little it was one of my favorite characters. Allora, the fashion is covered for now. Let's go with the sources because we haven't finished. Sailor Moon contains a lot of references to art history, as I previously mentioned. Naoko Takeuchi seems to be very fond of Art Nouveau, specifically of the Czech artist Alphonse Mucha, and of the shoulder flowy gown with elaborate embroidery on the bodies that Sailor Moon is modeled. There's other highly influential work by the same artist. There's also another illustration by the couple Usagi and Mamoru embracing in a very romantic way, which resembles the famous painting named The Kiss by the artist Klimt. Love, 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 love this painting. It's one of my favorite ones, actually. Other obvious influences by famous artists such as Van Gogh, Dali. We also find the screen painting displayed in a comical way. There's also Mercury with a background of the famous painting of The Great Weight of Kanagawa by the artist Hokusai Katsushika. There's other art references as illustrations that can be found across the art books. For instance, there is Sailor Moon resembling the painting of Satan in his original glory by William Blake, and a self-portrait of Robert Mapplethorpe, where you can see Endymion and Princess Serenity. Ms. Takeuchi also did an extra chapter later on made into a movie called The Lover of Snow Princess Kaguya, where she drew from Art Nouveau again and Art Deco. Inspired by an antique shopping that she did, the model of Snow Kaguya was inspired by an Art Deco ornamental piece called Salome. And as for Kaguya's minions, the snow dancers, were highly inspired by some statues from the 1920s known as Tanzarine by the artist Theo Boss. You can also find other objects to the series of the same artistic movement. Lastly, I will talk a little bit of the architecture. Most of its info can be found in the art books, where the author shares a lot of information about it. I think we can agree that the Roman and Greek architecture, it's pretty obvious as a theme in Sailor Moon. The background where Princess Serenity and Black Lady are standing, it's from a column of an ancient temple at the Roman Forum, when Naoko drew during a trip there. Ms. Takeuchi, though, wasn't only inspired by the Greek and Roman architecture and aesthetics when it came to the Moon Kingdom, she was also inspired by Palmyra, an ancient city in Syria. Also, I don't know if it's official, at least I haven't been able to verify it by notes or interviews made to the author, but the palace of the Moon Kingdom looks like the Taj Mahal of India. They're literally the same, right? So maybe she also took inspiration from that as well. There's also a little bit of Art Deco inspiration as well, especially those street lamps that have the shape of a rose. It reminds me very much of the roses made during that time. But yeah, it seems to be a mix of architecture of ancient cities and historical art overall. Plus the city that they live, which is Tokyo, but it's based on real places. But yeah, that will be, I guess, inspiration behind the architecture of Sailor Moon. And I think that will be all for this video. All I gotta say is that I like seeing her try different styles, being inspired by creations by other artists. I think in some cases a lot of artists and people take another creation and they just do a carbon copy. They don't even add their own flavor to it. But in some cases, I think it's amazing. I think it looks like you're doing an homage to the original creator artist. And I still wish though that she would have added a little bit more of her own touch. Some outfits were literally the same of the original ones, but well, it's done. I still like it, and I'm not mad at it. I would also like to mention how impressive are all of those fashion and art references that she took, considering that this is a series targeted for, you know, young girls and teens, probably unimpressed by all those glamorous gowns. Well, anyway, I think I'm gonna wrap it up here. I had so much fun doing all this research, making this video. Hopefully it was educational, you learned something new, or at least it was entertaining. I sure did. And as I said, I'm gonna make a part 2 of this video soon, so stay tuned. And nothing else. See you next time. Bye bye. Mwah.